And, I'm afraid at that point we have to go into the philosophical issue of there being metaphysical necessities, which are necessities as strong as logical necessities, but which may not be detectable merely by detecting a contradiction. You will see that my reasoning so far said there's no contradiction in supposing that I could exist without a body. And an opponent might admit that, as it were, there's no overt contradiction. But what he's saying is, well, perhaps by the word I, you are referring to something deep which keeps you in existence, of which you're unaware. And if you were really aware of what I consisted in, you would realize that there would be this argument would fall to bits because you don't know what you're talking about in it. The sort of example quoted in the literature is in the 18th century, people believed people didn't know what water was, in the sense that the word water was used to refer to whatever is the stuff in our rivers and seas and whatever has the same chemical essence as that stuff. But since we don't know what the chemical essence of that stuff is, or we didn't in the 18th century, therefore we don't know what we're fully talking about by water. And so we don't know whether some stuff not in our rivers and seas is water. At least that was the situation in the 18th century. But then it was discovered that water is H2O, that is, consists of molecules, each of which has two atoms of hydrogen and one of oxygen. When we know that, we know what we're talking about by water, and that will enable us to assess whether some proposition about water does or doesn't involve a contradiction. But if we are using these words, which I call uninformative designators, to pick out objects such that we don't really know what we're talking about by those objects, that science has to investigate the matter, then we won't know whether there is a contradiction involved. And therefore, says my opponent, since you don't know what you're talking about when you say that there's no contradiction in supposing I might survive death, you don't know whether there's a contradiction in it at all, because you don't know what the nature of I is. And that's the objection. And my counter move is you do know what the nature of I is, because I is something of which you can be aware when you are conscious, and not merely aware, about which you can know infallibly what it is in that situation. Suppose I am in pain. I can't, my knowledge, I know I'm in pain. Now, my knowledge doesn't consist of knowing there is a pain and wondering who has it. That's absurd. I know it's me that has it, and I can identify myself in this situation, the person who has this experience. And I can distinguish it radically from the situation of you having a pain, manifest what the difference is. So it's there are normal situations when we are conscious, we can know infallibly what it is we are referring to by I. We are referring to the subject who is having these experiences. And what that shows is that when we are talking about I in other situations, for example, I was born in such and such a year, I did this yesterday, of course we can't know infallibly whether these sentences are true. But what we can know infallibly is what would be the case if these sentences were true. And what would be the case is that the entity we are referring to when we are conscious was in that situation. I can't know infallibly whether they're true, but I know what I'm saying when I said I did this yesterday or I was born then. And therefore we are in a position to detect a contradiction if there is one. And so Descartes was right. We do know what we're talking about, and therefore the argument goes through that it would be contradictory to suppose that we would survive death if we didn't have any part other than our body, because it isn't a contradiction to suppose I could go on living even though I didn't have a body, and the only way that can be the case is if there's another essential part which constitutes my going on existing.